Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this is the big one. Well, there may be more big ones this year, but this is a big one that we've been waiting for a very long time, and it is very exciting. Yes, it looks like, not 100% confirmed, so do take this with a tiny speck of salt, but it appears we have finally gotten our very first official concept art for Metroid Prime 4. Now, Nintendo hasn't come out and literally said, hey, this is concept art for Metroid Prime 4. So because of that, you can't take it as 100% certainly true. But I certainly think it is, and I think a lot of you will agree with me, and it's exciting. Retro Studios has posted a banner of this, and it just looks awesome. And in this video, we're going to be doing a full analysis of everything we sort of speculated on already. Now, full disclaimer, I talked about this yesterday with both Rob from Real 2 Review and Dave from Super Metal Dave. Both of their channels will be linked in the description below and that discussion video as well, so please check that out. It was a fun, exciting discussion, and in there you'll actually see my immediate reaction. But for this video, I will have had some time and have sifted it over for about a night, and I will be providing a few more thoughts, a few more things, and fully breaking it down and putting it all together in this video. So that's what we're talking about today. Now before we jump to things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps even consider joining as a member. So I'm breaking down this analysis in 4 different categories. I'm not going to tell you what those categories are, but the first one is simply questioning if this is actually Prime 4. Why is this image for Metroid Prime 4? Why do I feel so confident that this is a concept art for Metroid Prime 4 that tells us details about this game, that is teasing this game? Why is that? Well, let's talk about it. So, the reason why, there's a number of reasons actually, but the first one is that this was posted on Retro Studios. Retro Studios is a developer wholly owned by Nintendo. They are responsible for the development of Metroid Prime 4, and also they developed Metroid Prime 1, Metroid Prime 2, Metroid Prime 3, Metroid Prime Trilogy, and they are rumored to be developing Metroid Prime Remaster as well. So here they are, they've posted concept art for Metroid, and Retro Studios doesn't post very often. If you take a look at their Twitter, it's pretty much just job postings. So for them to post this, it's very easily arguable that this is a sign of something. It's certainly a change of the pattern that we've seen from them in the past, and this is an official account, just for the record. They have the check mark and everything. This is Retro Studios putting out art that we've never seen before that is of the Metroid Prime brand. So, does that mean it has to be Metroid Prime 4? No. It could, in theory, be for Metroid Prime 1, the remaster that's rumored, or something from the Metroid Prime trilogy that's rumored, or it could just be general Metroid Prime. But I think it's definitely for Metroid Prime 4, because I'm of the belief that Retro Studios is both developing Metroid Prime 4, and they have developed the rumored Metroid Prime Remaster, which I believe will be announced later this year, potentially at E3. Now, this Metroid Prime Remaster, why should we believe it? Well, it's been reported by Emily Rogers, by Nate the Hate, by Jeff Grubb, all very reliable, well-regarded, well-respected industry insiders. They've been talking about this for a few years. So I do believe that it does make sense, and it seems to be lining up with a plan that Nintendo seems to have here, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. But basically, because I believe that there's a Metroid Prime Remaster coming and it's getting announced this year, it does make me wonder, could this be for the Metroid Prime Remaster? Maybe, but because it's a remaster or a remake, whatever it is, this would have to show something of that. And this looks nothing like anything from Metroid Prime 1. So I don't think it's Metroid Prime 1, so what could it be? Metroid Prime 4. The only game that's officially confirmed to be in development by Retro Studios. So it's not even really a stretch when you think of it in that way. It's probably the most logical mental leap to make, Metroid Prime 4. But it goes beyond that. If you pay attention to the color palette, it is very similar to the color palette of the initial announcement trailer as well. The dark blacks and blues and such, it's very close here. And then if we take a look at Samus herself, we can see that that is the Metroid Prime style Samus, and it's not just a silhouette, because if you look carefully, you can actually see some details on her, some of the actual appendages and lights that run through the armor and such, and even the visor itself. There is detail there, and it is of the detail that shows, well, Samus. So definitely I'm thinking this is for Metroid Prime 4. It seems really likely in my opinion, and the more and more you pay attention to this piece of art, you'll start to realize there's a lot of detail here. There's a lot of depth, and it goes far into the background. There is certainly a lot more here than what you may realize at first glance. Alright, so if this is for Metroid Prime 4, what's the deal? Why now? What's going on? What is Nintendo and Retro Studios thinking? Well, my impression is this. This is the opening of the Metroid Prime information deluge floodgate, however you choose to word that. This is the beginning of more information coming about this game. The marketing cycle is ramping up here. But you can argue this marketing cycle actually started with Metroid Dread. That's what I've been saying for a while, actually. You've been following me in my videos about Metroid. Metroid Dread was a big focus at E3. Not a focus, it was the focus, really. It was the biggest focus. They had multiple Treehouse events, they had a developer diary, it was a big surprise reveal. Metroid Dread was pushed with the Switch OLED, there's a lot of trailers pushing it, it was featured at the Game Awards, and it's seen some pretty incredible sales, in large part because Nintendo has been pushing in marketing, but also because it's a really good game. But also more recently, we've seen free DLC updates that are coming to Metroid Dread, and now we're getting this concept art here, but it's also rumored that Metroid Prime Remaster, which I do believe is real and is getting announced soon, will be announced around summertime, say E3. So if this is all to be the case, there seems to be a bit of a path here, a marketing path that Nintendo seems to have. Push Metroid Dread, make it the best-selling Metroid game of all time, which, as of December 31st, it's just 100,000 copies away from doing so. So it's very, very close, and it's pretty much guaranteed it probably has already passed that. It is the best-selling Metroid game yet. So basically what I'm getting at here is it seems like Nintendo is trying to assert the Metroid brand, revive it, resurrect it, and make it stronger than ever before. And with Metroid Dread and all the marketing it has had, we're already getting the best-selling Metroid game yet. This game is doing numbers that surpass Xenoblade Chronicles and Fire Emblem, series that we already see with fair frequency. But now we're getting this concept art from Retro Studios, and we have the free DLC for Dread to sort of tide us over probably until summertime when Nintendo has a big direct. Perhaps it'll be branded as an E3 direct, and in there will be more Metroid announcements. That's what I believe. I think they will show off Metroid Prime Remaster, but as I said earlier, I don't think this concept art is for Metroid Prime Remaster. I think this concept art is for Metroid Prime 4. So before this image came out, I was thinking maybe we wait a little bit longer for Metroid Prime 4 to get shown off. But what this concept art is telling me is that Nintendo will have something Metroid at E3, but essentially a couple things Metroid. I think they'll reveal the Metroid Prime Remaster and then tease Prime 4. When I say tease, I don't just mean like, hey, here's another piece of concept art. I mean probably a little trailer. Maybe nothing super substantial, but a little bit of something to tide us over for a little while. Maybe it doesn't happen at E3, but I do feel like it is coming sooner than later. We're not talking about a game that is now years away at this point. This game is within reach now. That's what this concept art suggests. I'd say at most, we're looking at 2.5 years from now. At most, but I'm thinking sooner than that. I'm thinking that we're looking at a situation where Prime 4 is going to make it out by the end of 2023. But, to be fully fair, a solid comparison of this situation might be from, say, the Splatoon 3 concept art that we saw at the beginning of 2020. Now, at the time, Splatoon 3 was not officially announced, so it's not entirely the same kind of situation, but it is similar. Because it was concept art that hinted at the game that came out at the beginning of the year. People weren't sure if it was actually for a game or not, and as it turned out, it was teasing Splatoon 3, which was fully revealed a year later, and is coming out later this summer, which brings us to about 2.5 years from the initial reveal of that concept art that we didn't know was for Splatoon 3, but it was somewhat of a tease here. This is clearly a tease, so if we consider in that way, we could be looking at perhaps Prime 4 coming out midway through 2024. That's all assuming they follow the same timeline based off a piece of art, right? I think in reality that they're sort of opening the floodgates here because they're going to start talking about this game because they are close to showing it off. And I think we're going to see it this year, and I think it's coming out next year. That's basically what I'm thinking right now. Could they wait until the beginning of next year or at some point to show off Metroid Prime 4? Sure, but I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be treated similar to Zelda, where it's going to be shown off somewhat in advance, and they will have a lead up there because Nintendo has a big plan for this game. Dread's just the beginning. Nintendo wants Metroid to be a big seller, and they are ramping this up because this is going to be one of their big killer games for next year. At least that's what I'm sort of taking away from this piece of concept art here. But now let's dig even deeper into this image. What is this actual image suggesting about the game, if anything? Is it possible that the image is simply just a very general, broad sense image that is meant to sort of excite us for Metroid and Metroid Prime 4, sort of like a, hey, Samus is coming back, here's Samus in a dark hallway, it's Metroid, it's creepy, it's futuristic, it's spacey, and there you go. That very well could be it, and nothing more, and there's not really any sort of interesting gameplay or story hints here. But there might be, so we're going to talk about it. So from a gameplay perspective, what's fascinating about this is that if this concept art is an actual representation of an actual area in the game, which we don't know for sure, but assuming it is, then it suggests quite a few interesting things here. One, Metroid, especially the Metroid Prime games, you have your sort of big openish areas that are connected by a series of hallways. This would be a hallway, but if you pay attention, it's not just a skinny, narrow hallway, it's actually rather wide, and if you pay even closer attention, it goes pretty far deep into the background. We can see structures well into the background here. There's quite a bit of detail if you pay close attention. So the potential implication here is that Metroid, while it may not be open world, could have much larger areas, including the tunnels, with a lot more that could actually happen within them, and perhaps there won't be as many doors masking loading screens. Now, that is a classic Metroid trope, so I'm not saying doors will be done away entirely, but perhaps there will be a lot less of those doors, a lot less loading screens, and a lot more interconnected areas, meaning that if you're getting chased by something, you can't just hide behind a door in the next room like previous Metroid games. Kind of similar to the transition for the Monster Hunter games. Before Monster Hunter World, all the sections were sectioned off and there were loading screens in between. If you were getting chased by a monster or getting beaten down, all you have to do was go to the next area and you had some reprieve. But with both World and Rise, there are no boundaries anymore. Monsters can chase you. They are a constant threat. But with Metroid, potentially a more horror-centric kind of game with enemies that can chase you and instill fear, they can chase you down. There's less places to hide, and that's exciting. And it kind of makes sense if we assume they're carrying over some of the philosophies they had with Metroid Dread, which I don't think would be a stretch. Keep in mind, while Metroid Dread was developed by Mercury Steam, it was also developed in tandem with core Nintendo. So I do believe a lot of the core philosophies and beliefs that Nintendo has for the Metroid series did translate over to Metroid Dread, and what that may suggest for Prime 4, especially when you consider the history of the series with the different games already having some fear elements and some surprise factor and a bit of a threat there, and the atmosphere and the isolation, but also the very roots of the series being inspired by Alien. This concept art could be suggesting long open areas with minimal places to hide with a constant threat there. Look how long this hallway is. Imagine if an Emmy-like creature or something even scarier was chasing you down, and you can't just hide or run away behind a little wall. There's a possibility there. And also, since we're talking about having to run down areas along giant tunnels, it's also possible that maybe Samus will have more platforming abilities this time around, more acrobatic abilities this time around, or at least more speed. A common complaint for the Metroid Prime games is that Samus felt very tanky, very slow, and when you compare her to how she is in the 2D Metroid games, she's very quick and agile. That's how Samus is supposed to be, but when you're in first person, it's not as easy to translate that idea. But the Prime games were made in the early 2000s. Technology and ideas have progressed since then. We've seen a lot of games like Mirror's Edge where there's a lot of free running and platforming and such, and even other first-person shooters that have elements like that. So they could perhaps be incorporating things like that in Metroid Prime that will speed up the gameplay and her movement. Perhaps it'll be even more of a hybrid first-person, third-person experience, not just entirely first-person. Technically, the Metroid Prime games are already a hybrid because Morpho mode was in third-person. But anyways, those are some potential hints simply with the long hallway there. But let's go back to the hallway here. It's dark. There are lights. There are perhaps channels. This seems to be perhaps some sort of sewage. You can even see little divots that seem to suggest perhaps that some sort of liquid could flow in there. Perhaps you can change the environment and liquid could flow through here, whether it's water or some sort of phazon or lava or something could be flowing through here, or at least there's a history of it there. That could have implications for the world itself, but also potentially gameplay, because it can impact your progression. But also with how wide and dark this area is, there could be things hiding in these holes or these little chambers that could come out at you at any point. Basically going back to this idea of fear elements or horror elements being in this Metroid game, and considering we're just coming off Dread, which was based on the concept of Dread, that could very well be the case here. Which sort of gets me thinking about some story elements here, because if you look carefully at Samus, I do believe that the character in the middle of the screen is Samus, but she does have this very long shadow. And what you may notice is the beginning of the shadow seems to be a little bit dark with her legs, but as we progress towards the waist area and the hips and such, they seem to fade and become a little bit lighter, but as we get closer to the foreground, it gets darker again. And perhaps it's simply lighting or shadowing, but the shadow doesn't seem to quite match Samus. It almost seems like the limbs are reversed. I would argue that the right side of the shadow should match the other side of Samus, and then vice versa. Yet there aren't. It's not quite a perfect match there. And again, this could simply be lights and shadows being manipulated, artistic expression. It's not going to be 100% perfect. That's all totally a possibility here. But when you take a look at just how detailed this environment is, just how much thought went into this, kind of strange. Something to consider here, especially considering the history of the series and there always being some sort of dark counterpart here. Could they be hinting at that? I think maybe. Now, I'm not saying it's Dark Samus. Keep in mind, Dark Samus completely, entirely destroyed for good at the end of Metroid Prime 3. While I do think Metroid Prime 4 could be related to a new Metroid becoming a Prime, because Sylux steals a Metroid egg at the end of Federation Force, and we know that Sylux is following Samus at the end of Prime 3, and also will be a part of the Prime 4 story based off interviews with Kensuke Tanabe, the Prime producer. That doesn't mean there will be a Dark Samus. Really, I just think it's implying that that Metroid could become the next Metroid Prime, become strong and powerful, monstrous and such, and it could be a huge, huge threat there. But then it also brings me to Sylux. Sylux can play a role in this story, and a thought crossed my mind at the end of my discussion with both Rob and Dave, which again is linked in the description below. That shadow, while it may not seem like a perfect match, and it may also just be manipulated somewhat because it's a shadow at the end of the day, there is manipulation there. The reason it might not match might not just be because of that, but actually be because that shadow is meant to hint at Samus's rival. It's not Dark Samus, but rather Sylux, which could explain for the awkward looking arms here. Sylux's arms, from what we've seen, they're not normal humanoid hands, they're kind of narrow and long and angular, which could potentially be what we're seeing here with that shadow. A possibility. Again, it could just be a shadow and nothing more, but hey, we're digging deep here. We're dissecting this piece of concept art because there's some cool stuff being shown off here. And if you look at the whole image, one of the first thoughts I had when I first saw it was, is this image some sort of visor? Maybe, maybe not. Could just be a stylistic little border, totally possible. But one of my first thoughts was, is this a visor? Because this is a Metroid image. And if that shadow is meant to somehow hint at a counterpart or a rival to Samus, but also simultaneously be the shadow of Samus, maybe we're looking at Samus from the perspective of potentially Sylux. At the end of the day, this is a piece of art. It is subjective. I'm sure a lot of you will have different types of interpretations and different ideas here. But one thing that I feel confident about is that this is very clearly talking about Metroid, but not just Metroid, Metroid Prime, and not specifically something from Metroid Prime 1 or anything of the trilogy, but just a new perspective of the Metroid Prime brand, and it was posted by Retro Studios, a company who has been very quiet for a very long time, but we know they've been working on Prime 4 for years at this point, and Metroid is thriving now. Now is the time to strike, and I think Nintendo greenlit this because this is the beginning of a beautiful run of the Metroid marketing campaign. But we shall see. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I'm excited about this. I can't wait to talk more about Metroid with you guys, but I'll see you all really soon. Take care.